Welcome back to the Shigeaki Podcast, where every week we uncover the small, powerful shifts that help you stay strong, sharp, and steady no matter your age. I'm Dr. Mark Hyman, and today I want to talk about something that doesn't just affect your body, it affects your freedom. It's your legs. Now, here's a story I'll never forget. A patient of mine, Richard, 68 years old, retired firefighter, proud grandfather of 4, strong guy, still goes on morning walks. But he came in one day and said, "Mark, I used to climb ladders. Now I get shaky walking up 3 steps. My legs just don't feel like they're mine anymore." And the scary part, his story is common. You see, most people assume weak legs are just a natural part of aging. But what if they're not? What if your legs aren't failing you? They're missing something. Today's episode is about the 3 vitamins your legs need after 60 to rebuild strength, protect your balance, and even prevent those dangerous falls we all worry about. And I couldn't think of anyone better to explore this with me than my dear friend and mentor, someone who has helped redefine aging not just in Japan, but around the world. Dr. Shigeaki Hinohara, neurologist educator, and one of Japan's most beloved doctors who lived to be over 100 years old and stayed mentally and physically active nearly every day of his life. Dr. Hinohara, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Mark. It is always an honor. You know, in my 70 years of caring for older adults, I have learned one thing very clearly. The legs are not the first part of the body to grow old. They are the first to show it. When the legs grow weak, people lose their balance. When balance goes, independence goes. And when independence is gone, motivation follows. But here is what most people miss. It is not only exercise that protects the legs. It is also nutrition, very specific, very targeted nutrition.
That's exactly what we'll explore today. We're going to break down the hidden reasons why your legs might feel heavier, shakier, or weaker, even if you're healthy. How 3 specific vitamins, D3, B12, and K2, impact your bones, muscles, and nerves, what to eat, how to supplement, and the Japanese strategies that keep elders walking strong past 90. So if your steps have felt less stable lately, or if someone you love is starting to shuffle instead of stride, stay with us. Because stronger legs don't start at the gym, they start at the cellular level. Let's clear up one of the biggest myths. First, people think they lose leg strength after 60 just because they're getting older. But physiologically, that's not entirely true. What's actually happening inside the body is a mix of preventable changes. The neuromuscular connection begins to fray. The brain doesn't talk to the muscles as clearly. There's a slow but steady loss of muscle mass called sarcopenia, and circulation, especially to the lower body, becomes less efficient, reducing oxygen and nutrient delivery to your legs. But none of these are automatic with age. They're often driven by nutrient deficiencies, chronic inflammation, and modern lifestyle choices.
That matches what I've seen for decades. In my clinic, many patients come in saying, "My legs are tired, my knees feel weak, but I still walk every day." So I ask them, "What are you eating to support those legs?" Most have no answer. They think movement is enough. But movement without nourishment is like trying to light a lamp with no oil. You see, in Japan, our elders walk a lot, yes, but they also eat in a way that feeds their joints, their nerves, and their bones, even in small portions. And we're very mindful about vitamins, especially D, B12, and K2, because these aren't just supplements. They are the keys to keeping legs coordinated, stable, and responsive.
You're touching on something really important there, the difference between strong legs and smart legs. A lot of older adults try to build muscle strength, but their balance still suffers. Their legs shake on stairs. They lose confidence crossing the street. Often the issue isn't the muscles themselves. It's the nerve signals, the brain-body connection, and the micronutrients that keep all of that firing properly.
Correct, the legs don't move in isolation. They depend on calcium to contract potassium, to fire nerves, magnesium to relax, and B12 to keep the entire signal network alive. When even one of those goes missing, you may still be able to walk, but you walk with hesitation, with wobble, with fear.
And what I see a lot in the US is this cycle: people lose leg strength. They move less, they lose more circulation, they stop going outside, they get less vitamin D, their bones get weaker, they fall. It's a slow spiral, but the good news is that spiral can be reversed. And it starts with identifying the 3 most critical vitamins that help stabilize and strengthen legs fast at any age.
Indeed, and the first one we must talk about because it is the foundation for both muscle strength and fall prevention is vitamin D3.
Let's talk about the first and perhaps most underestimated vitamin when it comes to leg strength, vitamin D3. Now, most people know D3 as the bone vitamin. They think it helps with calcium absorption, and that's true. But what often gets overlooked is its role in muscle contraction, nerve signaling, and overall balance. When your D3 levels are low, and they often are after 60, here's what happens. Muscles don't fire efficiently. Reflexes slow down. The brain has a harder time coordinating lower body movements. And worst of all, you lose your sense of balance even before your legs lose their strength. I've had patients who never fell during exercise, but fell in the kitchen while turning to pick something up. That's not muscle failure. That's neurological misfire, often linked to D deficiency.
I've seen the same mark. In Japan, we test D3 levels routinely in seniors, and it is common to find low levels even in those who walk daily or eat well. People forget that as we age, our skin produces less vitamin D from sunlight, even with the same amount of exposure. Also, those with darker skin or who spend little time outside may need 3 to 4 times the sun exposure to produce the same amount of D3. But here is the hopeful part. When patients raise their D3 levels not excessively, but consistently, their legs feel more grounded. They stand taller. They stop needing to hold onto the wall when they move.
Right, and there's a major study from Europe that found seniors with optimal vitamin D levels had a 40% lower risk of falling compared to those who were deficient. And the benefits don't stop at balance. D3 also helps regulate inflammation in the muscles and joints. That means fewer aches, better recovery from walking, and more motivation to keep moving. But not all sources of D3 are created equal.
That's an important point. In Japan, we traditionally get D3 from natural foods, fatty fish like mackerel, sardines, and salmon egg yolks, and small amounts from fermented foods. We also recommend 15 to 20 minutes of morning sunlight on the face and hands without sunscreen just briefly as a gentle daily habit. But for those who can't get sun, or whose diet is limited, supplementation becomes necessary.
I usually recommend around 1,000 to 2,000 IU of D3 daily, but always based on a blood test. What's tricky is that many people take calcium thinking they're helping their bones, but without enough D3, that calcium doesn't get absorbed properly and can end up in the wrong places. And even more, without enough magnesium, D3 can't do its job well. The nutrients work in concert, not in isolation.
Exactly. That's why we must treat vitamins not as single miracles, but as part of a daily rhythm. You eat, you walk, you rest, and in between you supply your body with what it has quietly lost over time. D3 is not just for bones, it is for movement, it is for safety, it is for the dignity of standing up without fear.
Beautifully said. So to everyone listening, if your legs feel unsteady, if your balance isn't what it used to be, if you dread climbing stairs, check your D3. Start small, eat with intention, step into the sun with purpose. And when we return, we'll talk about another crucial piece of this puzzle, a vitamin that doesn't just support your legs, but powers the nerves that control them. Vitamin B12, the spark plug of the neuromuscular system. If vitamin D3 is the foundation for strength and balance, then vitamin B12 is the communication line between your brain and your legs. Think of it this way. You could have strong muscles, good bones, even a decent sense of balance. But if your nerves can't send the right signals to your legs, none of that matters. And this is where B12 comes in. It plays a critical role in building and maintaining the myelin sheath. That's the protective layer around nerves that helps conduct impulses quickly and efficiently. Without enough B12, those signals slow down. You start to feel tingling in your feet, numbness, or dead zones in the legs, muscle twitching or cramping, loss of position awareness, that where are my feet feeling, and over time, even difficulty walking in a straight line.
Yes, this is a deficiency I take very seriously in my patients because it mimics other problems. Someone may think they have arthritis or weak knees or even dementia, but in reality, they're simply starving their nerves of the nutrients they need to communicate. And B12 is often the first to go unnoticed because it doesn't cause pain at first. It causes disconnection.
Exactly. And the reasons why seniors become B12 deficient are everywhere. Acid-blocking medications like PPIs, which reduce B12, absorption, age-related decrease in stomach, acid, diet low in animal protein, or worse, diets high in sugar and processed carbs, which crowd out B12-rich foods. And what's concerning is that even a mild B12 deficiency can reduce walking speed, impair reflexes, and make people feel unstable.
In Japan, we encourage older adults to include small portions of B12-rich foods in their daily meals. A slice of grilled mackerel, a hard-boiled egg, a bit of liver perhaps once a week, or even fermented fish dishes, which we consume in moderation. These are not large meals. They are gentle, daily microdoses of what the nerves need.
And for those who are vegetarian or who struggle with digestion, I often recommend sublingual B12 supplements. That's the kind you dissolve under your tongue. This bypasses the stomach entirely and gets the B12 directly into the bloodstream. And one quick clinical tip: if someone feels foggy, clumsy, or oddly disconnected from their lower body, especially in the feet, check B12 before assuming it's just age.
Indeed, I have seen patients in their 80s regain clarity and stability within weeks of correcting a B12 deficiency. It is not magic. It is restoring a bridge between the brain and the body. Without that bridge, your legs are guessing. With it, they are dancing again.
That's such a powerful image. So far, we've talked about building the structure with vitamin D, and now about restoring function with B12. But there's one more vitamin that ties everything together, and it may be the most misunderstood of all. It's not about giving more nutrients to your bones. It's about telling your bones where to send the nutrients you already have. Now, let's talk about the final piece of the puzzle, the vitamin most people don't even know they're missing: vitamin K2. You see, we often tell seniors to take calcium for their bones. We tell them to get vitamin D to absorb it, but almost no one tells them where the calcium should actually go. And that's what K2 does. It acts like a traffic controller in your body. It takes calcium from the bloodstream and deposits it into your bones and teeth where it belongs. Without enough K2, that calcium can build up in your arteries, your joints, or even your leg muscles, leading to stiffness, pain, and poor circulation.
Very true. And this is something Japan has known even before science explained it. In our traditional breakfast, especially among older adults, we often include a food called natto, a fermented soybean dish. It is sticky strong in flavor, but very rich in vitamin K2, especially the MK7 form. Studies have shown that regions in Japan where people eat more natto have significantly lower rates of hip fractures and arterial calcification. I have encouraged even my most reluctant patients to eat a small spoon of it each morning. They laugh at first, but many of them report that their knees feel lighter, their legs more flexible.
I've actually tried natto. I'll admit it takes some getting used to, but I completely respect it as a functional food. And for those who don't have access to it or who can't handle the taste, there are alternatives. You can get K2 from fermented cheeses like Gouda or Brie grass-fed butter egg yolks, and in supplement form usually as MK7, which stays in the bloodstream longer than MK4. And just like we said with D3 and B12, K2 doesn't work in isolation. It pairs perfectly with vitamin D3 to send calcium into the bones, strengthen the legs, and keep the arteries in your lower body clear and elastic.
Yes, and this is especially important for people who already take calcium or D3 supplements. Taking those without K2 can cause calcium to accumulate in the wrong places, contributing to cramping heaviness or even vascular stiffness in the legs. I often say calcium gives you the building blocks, but K2 is the architect who draws the plan. Without the architect, the blocks go anywhere, and that's when trouble begins.
So true. And for older adults trying to regain leg strength balance and confidence, adding K2, whether through food or supplement, may be the simplest way to unlock the true power of D3 and calcium. It's not just about what you take. It's about where it goes and what it does once it gets there.
Aging gracefully is not about fighting time. It is about feeding what time takes away slowly, patiently, and with precision. When your legs feel stable, your mind feels free. And when both are working together, you don't just live longer, you walk into life with confidence.
So, let's bring it all together. If your legs feel slower, shakier, or just not like they used to, don't rush to blame your age. Don't assume it's just part of getting older, because sometimes what looks like decline is really deficiency. Vitamin D3 gives your legs power and balance. Vitamin B12 reconnects the nerves that control them. And vitamin K2 makes sure calcium ends up in your bones, not your joints or arteries.
These 3 vitamins, they are not magic, but they are often missing from modern aging. And when restored gently, daily, wisely, the changes are profound. I have seen people walk steadier within weeks, climb stairs without fear, even regain the joy of going outside, of standing tall, of feeling safe in their own body again.
That's what this podcast is really about. Not anti-aging, but pro-vitality. Because your legs are more than muscles. They are your independence. They are your freedom. They are how you greet your grandchildren, carry your groceries, dance to old songs.
And they are listening to what you feed them every single day. So ask yourself, are you giving them what they need to stay strong? Are you nourishing your nerves, not just your muscles? Are you walking into your future with intention?
If you're not sure where to start, begin with a blood test for vitamin D and B12. Add 1 B12-rich food to your day, an egg, a piece of fish. Try natto or fermented cheese once a week for K2. And talk to your doctor about safe, simple supplements if needed. Your legs carried you through your first 6 decades. Now it's time to carry them with care.